America the Beautiful. It's only the late, great Ray Charles can do. So how many have wanted to travel across the United States? Some have. Some go a usual route of the country's national parks. Nothing wrong with that. Some decide to take the road less traveled, or at least a road that is the nation's first transcontinental route, and to take the trip during the pandemic, trying to better understand America and listening to music along the way. Frank Escobar did just that. He traveled the back roads of the United States that is known as the Lincoln Highway with his wife in a Winnebago. He is a Bloomberg opinion columnist, member of the editorial board covering national affairs. Full disclosure, chief speechwriter to then Mayor Michael Bloomberg during the 2020 presidential campaign and in New York City Hall. Michael Bloomberg, of course, the founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. His new book, Frank's new book, Backroads and Better Angels, A Journey into the Heart of American Democracy. He joins us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. I should say welcome, but you're family.
What a cool trip.
And you first thought about it back in 2016, right?
Back in 2016, when the country seemed to be coming apart at the seams, I was looking for a different way into the story that everybody was talking about, which is what's happening and why is the country so divided. And I wanted to go exploring what holds the country together. And I stumbled across this thing called the Lincoln Highway, which, as it turns out, starts here in New York in Times Square and runs all the way across the country to San Francisco. And it was the first road to connect the two coasts. It was dedicated in 1913. And so I thought, what better way to explore what holds the country together than by channeling the spirit of Lincoln and driving this road. Now, it didn't happen because life got in the way, but the pandemic came along in 2020, and my wife and I realized this was our opportunity. It was now or never.
Was it snap judgment? No problem? Your wife said, yep, I'm in?
It took a little work. It wasn't quite that quick, but she was all in, and it did happen really quickly. We had never driven an RV before, and so we had to move quickly. And
25 feet, 2017, Winnebago.
Exactly. We decided it was the biggest RV we wanted to drive and the smallest RV we wanted to live in, but it had everything we needed: a bed, a kitchen, a bathroom, and off we went.
So you made some interesting stops. I mean, obviously you had a job to do. You weren't just driving and sightseeing.
That's right.
You wanted to stop and talk to important people. How did you choose, with whom you would speak, and, how do you set up? I feel like you had to have a tour manager in order to organize everything.
I wish I had had a tour manager. It was very much happening on the fly. I didn't have a lot of time to put it together, but I wanted to talk with people who would represent a cross-section of the country, people from all different backgrounds and working all different types of jobs and in different industries. And I wanted to talk with people who had interesting stories to tell that would represent what I was after, which was this better sense of what holds us together. And so in some cases, the people we spoke with, of course, were just spontaneous, people we met along the way, always interested to hear those stories. But I also would reach out to people before we arrived in town and ask, do you have time to sit down? Sometimes it was a civic leader, sometimes it was a business leader, sometimes it was a farmer, sometimes it was an activist. And the good thing about the pandemic, to the extent there was a good thing, is people had more time on their hands. Everyone's schedule was interrupted, and people were really generous with their time.
We found it just kind of, once everybody got up and running and being on air and working from our homes, everybody was accessible because everybody was home.
That's right.
I do want to ask you, your first interview, who that was, and I also want to even take one more step back. Why the Lincoln Highway?
Yeah, so the Lincoln Highway to me represented it was a hopeful idea in 1913 when there was no road across the country. It was a way to stitch the country together, a way to encourage more people to see more of the country. I think that's still something that we need more of today. At a time when we talk about flyover country, the Lincoln Highway was kind of the original idea of combating the notion of flyover country. And so we left on September 11th from New York City.
And you purposely chose September 11th?
We did, because having lived in New York on September 11th, it's impossible not to carry with you the spirit, I think, the spirit of unity that we all felt in the aftermath. And so that's what I wanted to take with us and to try to channel. And so my first interview on September 11th was actually with the mayor of Jersey City, Steve Fulop, who was downtown as I was.
My home city.
Oh, you didn't get very far.
It didn't get very far at all. No.
I'm a Jersey person, but it's where I
You
live now.
started in Times Square and you just drove to Jersey City. You're like, hey, stop here.
Stop here. First stop, yeah. And we stopped. There's a Lincoln statue in Jersey City, a great one. And so I had a great conversation with him about his 9/11 story. He was working downtown as I was on that day. He ended up joining the Marines, and he talked about his journey from there and what led him to end up running for office.
So what about when you actually get into flyover country? Because you're still a long way from it in Jersey City, okay? I mean, you haven't even got to the Newark airport yet.
You gotta start somewhere.
So like when you get to the real America,
It's all real.
who are you talking to in the heartland, though?
Well, as all people from all different walks of life. And so, the heartland also includes Chicago. The Lincoln Highway runs through big cities and small towns. But in Ohio, I spoke with a farmer, Chris Gibbs, who had a real interesting story. A friend of mine introduced me to him. He was a lifelong Republican, very active in Republican Party politics. Grew disillusioned with the party under Trump, decided to become an independent. And in doing that, he found something happened he didn't expect, which is he lost most of his friends. And that was a really tough story to hear. But it was representative of how personal politics has become, I think. And a lot of people have a version of that where we've lost friendships over that. The good news of his story is he didn't give up. He decided to become an independent, and as it turns out, the Democratic Party asked him to chair the local county party committee, and he's now doing that.
I'm just trying to get to the other side because, we're here in New York. When we put together a two-sided panel, neither one likes Trump, right? When you talk to a Republican, you're talking to one who doesn't support Trump, but yet half the country does support Trump. And I imagine you left this, bubble in order to get in touch with that other half to find out what these hillbilly elegy people were all about. So did you run into any of them?
Of course we did. Lots of Trump supporters, and saw Trump signs all along the route, lots of them. But my purpose was not to try to explain other people to readers, right? This was not hillbilly elegy. I wasn't trying to do that. I was trying to let people speak about their own experiences in ways that would remind us of what holds us together. And so to give you one example of a Trump supporter, a really strong Trump supporter I spoke with, two, husband and wife out in Arizona. When we made it to the end of the Lincoln Highway, we kept going. Two ranchers. And they talked about how difficult life had been for them under the Obama administration because of a change in a EPA rule, and the difficulty they were facing because of an EPA rule that would require them to fence their ranchers. It's open range, require them to fence their road, and it would have cost $2 million. I said $1.6 million. I said, $1.6 million to put a fence up? Granted, it's a big property. And he said, well, I could do it for $60,000, but because of federal regulations, it would cost me $1.6 million. And so that's an example of someone who, I think the more you listen to people's stories about why they support the other party, the more understandable they become.
Did you find most people were willing to talk?
Absolutely. In fact, almost no one said, I don't want to talk or I don't have time. People were really forthcoming and welcoming.
Did you? Oh, go ahead, Matt.
Well, no, I'm curious about the Winnebago side of it because I would love to do that. Also, I've never driven an RV.
Well, talk about when you first got it, right? You had to go to, was it Tennessee? No, where'd you go to pick it up?
So we bought it used, and a woman in Florida was kind enough to drive it halfway. So I met her in North Carolina.
Oh, North Carolina, forgive me.
Picked it up, had no idea what I was doing, got in the driver's seat, feared that I had bit off more than I could chew. And kind of did. But at that point, it's too late. And so we drove it back to New York, and then off we went. But yeah, neither of us, my wife nor I, had driven an RV before. We had never lived in an RV.
You parked it on the street in the city?
Well, we brought it upstate for a few days, and then we brought it back into the city. But no, I never actually. In fact, we walked the first mile of the Lincoln Highway from Times Square to the river, and then we got a ferry and picked up.
It was on the other side.
Yes, it was on the other side. Yeah,
smart move.
Yeah.
Listen, sit tight. We got to do some news, but we'll come back and continue the conversation. Talking with Frank Berry, Back Roads and Better Angels is his book, A Journey into the Heart of American Democracy, because I am also curious about maybe the last person he talked to and if he has hope going forward, but we're going to get into that on the other side. This is Bloomberg.
Wave that flag, wave it wide and high.
Little Grateful Dead, a gift for you, but it's really part of Frank's
Thank you
playlist.
very much. I appreciate it. I'm so bummed that I will miss the last shows at the Sphere this weekend. Maybe I'll fly out there.
Or get into Winnebago.
In Winnebago, it's going to take a while.
All right,
you guys took 2 months to get across the country.
We did.
I mean, that way,
Yes.
right?
Right. 2 months to get to San Francisco. We arrived on Election Day or on Election Day Eve. And
What was that like?
Well, it was crazy because San Francisco was empty downtown. It was being boarded up as we pulled in because there was a real fear of Election Day or Election Night violence if the results went the wrong way. And so that was really disturbing to see in a trip that was exploring democracy, to be in a city where there was a fear of violence at the end of an election. That's something that I had never seen in my life.
We're a young country, a young democracy, right? We've definitely seen our moments of strife. We've had a civil war. After talking to people, do you have more hope?
A lot, yeah. I came away really optimistic, actually, and full with hope. Partly because that's what I heard from people when there was a lot of frustration I'd hear from both Democrats and Republicans about how divided we were. But in the end, most people expressed hope that we would get through it. They weren't always able to articulate exactly why, but there was this sense that we would get through it because that's what we do. And actually, there's a lot of history in the book, but that's probably the most historically accurate assessment that you could make because we've been through so much as a country, even though we're relatively young, so much violence and division, Civil War being the worst of it, but plenty of other episodes too. But we've found ways to get through it, and part of the story of the book is highlighting those ways, the kind of the values that have led us out of the dark times. And I think the more we can recognize that we've been through versions of what we're experiencing today, the more kind of hope and faith we will have that we can get through it.
Are there any prescriptions? I mean, hopefully we don't have to get to a civil war before we can reset, right? How should we deal with this division?
Well, there's a lot I think that we can learn from Lincoln, and that's why he's the perfect guide for the trip. And so one thing to keep in mind is, Lincoln in the 1850s, as the country was heading towards civil war, said of white Southerners, they are just as we would be if we were in their situation. Now, Lincoln abhorred slavery, thought of it as a moral abomination. But here he was speaking about Southerners and their support for slavery with no judgment. And I think that is something that we can learn from because today there's so much judgment about the other side and so much kind of quickness to decide that the other side is not just wrong, but they're evil. And I think the more that we can recognize that we're shaped by our circumstances and that that different points of view can still hold valid perspectives, to not assume that we are entirely correct, that others have valid viewpoints, the more that we can try to hold the whole thing together.
Frank, do you think it's just Donald Trump, so that if he is no longer a part of the GOP or guiding or leading the GOP, do things change? I mean, you saw people as you drove, and it was off the beaten path, right? Sometimes it was dirt roads. And one of the things that we often talk about is the struggles that a lot of Americans feel that, yep, we've got a stock market that sometimes is hitting records, or we've seen it, and yet that's not Main Street. And so I wonder if it's something deeper in the fabric right now.
Yeah, it's definitely deeper. This doesn't all go away. The division doesn't all go away if Trump goes away. I definitely believe it runs much deeper than that, and that's why we've got to be able to recognize what can get us through it. Because it's not just defeating Donald Trump. It's not waiting for him to leave the political scene. Mm-hmm. The forces that are dividing the country right now, and you see it anytime you pick up social media. You see it on your phone, but you hear it in conversations, and you sense it in people's anxiety. All of that is going to be with us, and it really requires leaders to tap into, as I say in the book, the better angels of our nature. It's a Lincoln phrase, but it does require leadership that reminds us of the best of America and the best of our values, and to recognize when leaders are trying to exploit the worst in us and to tap into our fears and hatred.
Well, and I guess we have to be open as well. You know, when I think about the problems on the left, you've got the sort of cancel culture and sort of this gaslighting censorship. I'm sure a lot of people on the right feel that they can't speak or be heard because they're not allowed to say how they feel.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And that's something I speak with people in the book about, that also is a threat to democracy. And sometimes Democrats fall into the trap of thinking that threats only exist on the right, and that's wrong. They exist on the left too, and that censorship that you're talking about is a big part of it. And I heard that from people in different parts of our journey, the fear of speaking their minds. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times that fear was on the left because of either, facing personal or professional repercussions for stating their opinion. That's a really unhealthy thing in a democratic society if people feel afraid to express an opinion.
Does academia make it worse? I used to think about, one of our producers said, that's what college is. You say stupid things and then you learn.
Yeah.
And we don't do that anymore. Or if you do, the penalties are incredible.
Yeah.
Are you talking about professors or students?
I'm talking about both. No, but you know what I'm saying? Like it was an environment.
Both are capable of saying stupid things.
You know what I'm
Yeah, college should be a place where you make mistakes and learn and grow. But also, any community should have a level of forgiveness and understanding that we're not going to see things differently. And the desire to shame and punish people for being on what someone views as the wrong side of an issue is really counterproductive to a civil democratic society.
Your last person, we've only got about 40 seconds. Did you think long and hard about the last person you wanted to speak to?
Well, as it happens, the trip, we went across the country and back. We ended at the Lincoln Memorial. And so I had an old friend I hadn't spoken to in many years, Sergeant Mike Riccardi, is a Capitol Police officer. He was on duty on January 6th. And so I spoke to him about his day. He's a conservative Republican, and he relayed the events of that day and how harrowing and dangerous and how much worse it almost was. And that was a really powerful thing to hear from him. And so that helps to conclude the story.
I'm interested in the Winnebago. How did you like it? And would you do it again?
We would do it again in a heartbeat. We loved it. We got very comfortable in it very quickly. We made plenty of mistakes, learned along the way, but yes, do it again in a second.
Nice. If you didn't know, Matt is our car guy.
A long day here.
It's been a super long week. Frank, thank you so much. Good luck with it.
Thank you.
The book, Backroads and Better Angels, A Journey into the Heart of American Democracy. It is out now. This is Bloomberg Businessweek.